The crystal glass shattered, and the entire VIP room stopped breathing. Lorenzo Moretti, a billionaire who owned half of Milan, stood frozen as his mother sobbed uncontrollably in a language no one in the room understood. Managers panicked. Guests stared. Security waited for an order. Everyone expected the waitress to kneel and clean the mess. What no one knew, what Lorenzo would realize far too late, was that the young woman standing there had already been fired, had nothing left to lose, and understood every word his mother was whispering. When she spoke a single sentence, in an ancient Sicilian dialect, power shifted instantly. The billionaire thought he controlled the room. He was wrong. The rain in Seattle was relentless, hammering against the dark windows of the Gilded Lily like a warning. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly perfect. The scent of truffle oil and vintage beau hung heavy in the air, masking the smell of fear radiating from the staff. Clara adjusted her apron, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed the fabric over her waist. She had been working a double shift on an empty stomach, fueled only by lukewarm tap water and the desperate need to pay her rent. Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, had slid a final eviction notice under her door that morning. 3 days, it read. She had 3 days to come up with $2,000, or she would be sleeping in her rusted Toyota Corolla. Clara stopped daydreaming and polished the silverware for table 1. The voice cracked like a whip. Gideon, the floor manager, loomed over her. Gideon was a man who wore suits that were too tight and a cologne that smelled of desperation and musk. He hated Clara. He hated her because she was quiet, because she didn't flirt with him like the other waitresses, and because she possessed a quiet dignity. He couldn't break. "I've already polished them," Gideon Clara said softly, keeping her eyes down. "They are spotless. Check them again," he sneered, leaning in close. "Tonight is not just any night. The Moretti family is coming. Do you know who Lorenzo Moretti is? Of course you don't. You're just a college dropout serving pasta to people who make your yearly salary in a minute." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. She wasn't a dropout. She had paused her degree in linguistics when her grandmother got sick. The medical bills had drained everything, her savings, her future, and her dreams. Now she was 24, invisible, and serving risotto to the elite. "I'll check them again," she whispered. "Good. And stay out of sight," Gideon hissed. "I've assigned Jessica to table 1. She has the look Mr. Moretti prefers. You stick to the kitchen runners and buzzing. If I see you near the VIP section, you're done. Understand?" Clara nodded. Jessica was beautiful blonde and bubbly. She was also notoriously clumsy and didn't know the difference between a Pont Noir and a Merlot. But Gideon didn't care about competence. He cared about aesthetics. As Clara retreated to the back, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open. The air in the room seemed to shift, the temperature dropping a few degrees. Lorenzo Moretti walked in. He was taller than he looked in the magazines, his shoulders broad beneath a custom-tailored Bayonne suit that cost more than Clara's entire life. His hair was dark, swept back with careless precision, and his eyes were the color of espresso, dark, intense, and unreadable. He didn't look at the staff lined up to greet him. He didn't look at the decor. He looked tired. Beside him, clutching his arm with a frail, trembling hand, was an elderly woman dressed in severe black lace. This was Signora Paola Moretti. She walked with a cane, her face etched with a deep, profound sorrow. "Welcome, Mr. Moretti." "Signora Moretti." Gideon bowed low, his oiliness practically dripping onto the floor. "We have the private alcove prepared overlooking the bay." Lorenzo gave a curt nod. "Make sure it is quiet. My mother is fatigued." "Of course, sir." "Right this way." Clara watched from the shadows of the service station. She felt a strange pang in her chest as she looked at the old woman. Senora Paula looked terrified. Her eyes darted around the opulent restaurant, not with awe, but with confusion. She looked like a bird trapped in a golden cage. "Water," Clara Ara heard Lorenzo say as they sat down, "and bring the menu but keep the lights low." Right away, Gideon snapped his fingers at Jessica. "Go!" Jessica smoothed her hair, unbuttoned the top button of her blouse, and sashayed over with a picture of water. Clara Ara bit her lip. She had a bad feeling. The old woman was muttering to herself, her hands wringing a silk handkerchief. Clara Ara turned back to the coffee machine, trying Clear's throat to block it out. It wasn't her table. It wasn't her problem, but the knot in her stomach tightened. She knew that look on the old woman's face. She had seen it on her own grandmother in the final months. It wasn't just fatigue, it was displacement, a deep, aching loneliness that no amount of money could fix. 10 minutes later, the first disaster struck. Jessica came rushing back to the service station, her face pale. "Oh my God!" she hissed to Clara Ara. "The old lady is crazy." "What happened?" Clara Ara asked, instinctively grabbing a fresh napkin. "She won't order. She just keeps pushing the menu away and crying. And she's speaking some gibberish. Lorenzo is getting pissed. Gideon is freaking out. Is she speaking Italian?" Clara Ara asked. "I don't know. It sounds like Italian, but Gideon speaks Italian, and he said he couldn't understand her. She's just wailing. God, I hope this doesn't ruin my tip." Clara Ara looked out across the dining room. The situation at table 1 was deteriorating rapidly. Lorenzo was leaning forward, holding his mother's hand, his face a mask of helpless frustration. Clear's throat. Gideon was hovering, looking useless and sweaty. "Mother, please." Clara Ara heard Lorenzo's deep voice carry over the low music. "Just tell me what is wrong, Dimikos." The old woman shook her head, violently, tears streaming down her face. She slammed her hand on the table, rattling the silverware. She shouted something guttural, sharp, and filled with pain. Gideon stepped forward. "Perhaps a sedative, or I can call a doctor." "Back off," Lorenzo snarled, turning on the manager. The entire restaurant went silent. "She is not sick. She is upset. Do not speak of her like she is an invalid." "I apologize, sir. I only meant, get me someone who can understand her," Lorenzo demanded, standing up. His presence was terrifying. "She is asking for something specific. She keeps saying, cuscino. What is cuscino? Is it a dish? A wine?" Gideon looked around wildly. "I believe it might be a pillow, sir. Cuscino in Italian is pillow. We brought her a pillow," Lorenzo roared, gesturing to the silk cushion on the chair. She threw it on the floor. "That is not what she wants." The old woman began to sob louder, rocking back and forth. It was a heartbreaking sound, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. Clara Ara couldn't stop herself. Her feet moved before her brain could catch up. She knew that word. It wasn't standard Italian. It wasn't the Italian taught in schools or spoken in Rome. It was older, deeper. She walked out of the shadows. "Clara," Gideon hissed as she passed him. "Get back in the kitchen now." She ignored him. She walked straight up to the billionaire's table. Lorenzo turned his blazing eyes on her. For a second, she thought he might strike her or have security throw her out. He looked like a man at the end of his rope. "Sir," Clara Ara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "She doesn't want a pillow." Lorenzo looked her up and down. She was wearing the standard ill-fitting uniform, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked nothing like the polished models he was used to. "And who are you?" he asked coldly. "Another incompetent staff member to waste my time." "No," Clara Ara said. She turned to the old woman. She crouched down so she was eye level with Signora Paola. The woman was trembling, her eyes squeezed shut. Clara Ara took a breath. She reached into the depths of her memory, to the summers she spent in the tiny, dusty village of Corleone, with her nonna, listening to the old dialect that was slowly dying out. Signora Clara Ara whispered softly, "Malwasi, the heart has no window, but the eyes do." The old woman froze, her eyes flew open. She looked at Clara Ara, stunned silence replacing her sobbing. Clara Ara smiled gently. "So, Mama, do you want a pillow, or do you want the red silk cushion your mother used to make? It was a gamble." Cuscinu in the Sicilian dialect could just mean pillow, but in the old stories, her grandmother told it often referred to a specific comfort object. A small sachet of lavender and dried herbs sewn into red silk used to calm nerves. Signora Paola's hands reached out and grabbed Clarara's face. See, she wept. But these were different tears. Si u cuscino della vana, l'ora d'asa. I miss my home. Too much cold here. Too much grey. Clara looked up at Lorenzo. He was staring at her, his mouth slightly open, the anger drained from his face, replaced by shock. "She misses the smell of home, sir," Clara explained, standing up but keeping her hand in the old woman's grip. "She's not asking for a pillow to sit on. She's asking for a lavender sash. In Sicily, specifically in the older generation, they keep them for anxiety. She says Seattle is too cold and grey. She feels lost." Lorenzo looked at his mother, then back at Clara. "Lavender. I have some dried lavender in my locker," Clara said quickly. "I use it for tea. I can make her a sachet. It will take 2 minutes." "Do it," Lorenzo commanded. Clara turned to run, but Gideon blocked her path, his face purple with rage. "You are fired," he whispered, venomously grabbing her arm. "You embarrassed me in front of the most important client we have. You overstepped. Get your things and leave." "But he asked me to. I don't care. You made me look incompetent. Get out now." Gideon shoved her toward the back exit. Clara stumbled. The injustice burned in her eyes. She had just solved the problem, and now she was losing the only thing keeping a roof over her head. "Is there a problem?" Lorenzo's voice was low, dangerous, and directly behind them. Gideon spun around, putting on a fake smile. "No, sir, just disciplining the staff. She was interrupting your dinner. I'm sending her home." Lorenzo stepped forward, towering over the manager. "She is the only person in this entire city who has made my mother stop crying in 3 days. And you are firing her, sir. She is just a runner. She isn't trained for VIP." Silence. Lorenzo didn't shout, but the command struck the room like a hammer. He turned to Clara. "What is your name, Clara, sir?" "Clara Evans." "Clara," Lorenzo repeated. The way he said her name, rolling the R, slightly sent a shiver down her spine. "Go get the lavender, bring it to the table, and ignore this idiot. If he speaks to you again, I will buy this building and evict him within the hour." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Clara fashioned a small sachet, using a clean linen napkin and the dried lavender from her tea stash. When she brought it to the table, Signora Paola held it to her nose and inhaled deeply, her shoulders finally dropping. For the first time, the old woman smiled, a genuine warm smile that lit up her wrinkled face. "Gradi figlia mia. Thank you, my daughter," she whispered, patting Clara's hand. Lorenzo watched the interaction with hawk-like intensity. He didn't eat much. He spent the evening watching Clara. Every time she came to the table to refill the water or clear a plate, Gideon had been banished to the kitchen and Jessica had been dismissed. Lorenzo's dark eyes followed her. It was unnerving. Clara felt exposed. She was used to being invisible part of the furniture. To be seen by a man like Lorenzo Moretti, a man who radiated power and danger, was terrifying. At the end of the meal, Lorenzo placed a black American Express card on the table. "The check," he said. Clara Ara processed the payment. She brought the receipt back, her hand shaking slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti. I hope your mother feels better." Lorenzo stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "Clara Ara, walk us to the car." "Sir, I can't leave the floor. Walk us to the car." It wasn't a request. Clara Ara nodded. She followed them out into the cool Seattle night. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting at the curb, the driver holding the door open. Lorenzo helped his mother in ensuring she was comfortable with her lavender sash. Then he shut the door and turned to Clara Ara. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement glistening under the streetlights. "You speak the Sicilian dialect," he said. "Not just Italian, specifically the dialect of the hills near Corleo." "How?" "My grandmother, Clara Ara," said, hugging her arms around herself to ward off the chill. "She was from there. She raised me. She refused to speak English in the house." "And you are a waitress here?" "Yes, sir. For how long? 2 years. And before that, I was a student." "Linguistics." Lorenzo studied her face. He looked at her worn-out shoes, the fraying hem of her apron, Claire's throat, the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. He saw the struggle. He saw the pride. "My mother has dementia," Lorenzo said abruptly. The admission seemed to cost him something. "It is early stages, but it is aggravated by stress. My father died 6 months ago. Since then, she has been drifting. We came to Seattle for a specialist at the University of Washington, but the travel has been hard on her. She hates the hotel. She hates the food. She hates the language. I have hired 3 nurses. She fired all of them. She screams if they come near her." Clara Ara listened, her heart aching for him. Claire's throat. Behind the billionaire facade, he was just a son trying to save his mother. "She didn't scream at you," Lorenzo said softly. "She called you daughter." He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a business card. It was heavy textured card stock with gold embossing. "I need a personal assistant for my mother while we are in the States. Someone to translate, to sit with her, to make her feel safe. Someone who speaks her language." Clara Ara blinked. "Mr. Moretti, I have a job. I might not have one after tonight because of Gideon, but I will pay you $10,000 a week," Lorenzo said calmly. Clara Ara choked on air. "Excuse me, 10,000 a week plus accommodation. We are staying at the penthouse of the Four Seasons. You will have your own suite." "Mr. Moretti, that's insane." "I'm just a waitress." Lorenzo took a step closer. He was so close she could smell his cologne. Sandalwood sea salt and something expensive and sharp. He towered over her, blocking out the city lights. "You are not just a waitress. Tonight you are a miracle. My mother hasn't smiled in months. Do you know what that is worth to me? It is worth every penny I have." He pressed the card into her hand. His fingers brushed her palm, sending Claire's throat, a jolt of electricity through her arm that made her breath hitch. "Be at the Four Seasons tomorrow at 8:00 a.m. Do not be late, Clara Ara." He turned and got into the car. The window rolled down as the engine purred to life. "And bring your luggage," he added. "You won't be coming back to this dump." The Rolls-Royce pulled away, disappearing into the night. Clara Ara stood alone on the sidewalk, the business card burning against her skin. $10,000 a week. It was a lifeline. It was a fortune. But as she looked at the retreating tail lights, she felt a warning bell ring in the back of her mind. Lorenzo Moretti was not a man who gave gifts. He was a man who made deals, and she had a feeling that stepping into his world would cost her something much more valuable than her time. Clara Ara didn't sleep that night. She spent the hours packing her meager belongings into 2 suitcases. She looked at her small, damp apartment one last time, the peeling wallpaper, the dripping faucet. She left the keys on the counter. At 7:55 a.m., she stood in the lobby of the Four Seasons. The marble floors were polished to a mirror shine, and the air smelled of fresh lilies. She felt painfully out of place in her simple grey slacks and white blouse. "I'm here to see Mr. Moretti," she told the concierge. The man raised an eyebrow, looking at her luggage. "Do you have an appointment? He told me to come." Before the concierge could question her further, the elevator chimed. A man in a sharp black suit, Lorenzo's head of security, stepped out. "Miss Evans," the man asked, "Mr. Moretti is expecting you. I am Marco. Please follow me." They rode the private elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, Clara Ara gasped. The penthouse was larger than her entire apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Puget Sound. The furniture was modern Italian, sleek and white. Lorenzo was standing by the window talking on a phone in rapid-fire Italian. He was wearing a casual navy sweater and dark jeans, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a model in a GQ spread. He saw her and hung up immediately. "You are early," he said. "Good," Mr. Moretti, Clara said, gripping the handle of her suitcase. "Lorenzo," he corrected, "if you are to care for my mother, we cannot be formal. Come." Clear's throat. "She is having breakfast on the terrace." Clara followed him. On the terrace, Senora Paola was sitting at a glass table, picking at a croissant. When she saw Clara, her face lit up. "Bed Matri, Mother of God," she exclaimed. "It is the girl with the lavender." Clara smiled and went to her. "Buongiorno, Signora." For the next hour, Clara worked her magic. She convinced Paula to eat some fruit by telling her a story about the orchards in Sicily. She helped her adjust her shawl. She spoke to her in that soft, rhythmic dialect that seemed to act as a tranquilizer for the old woman's nerves. Lorenzo sat in the corner, typing on a laptop, but Clara could feel his eyes on her. He was watching every move. Around 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. "That will be the stylist," Lorenzo said, closing his laptop. "The stylist?" Clara asked. "We have a gala tonight, the Global Tech Summit. My company is acquiring a Seattle-based AI firm. My mother cannot attend, but I need a companion. And since you are now my employee, you will attend." Clara panicked. "I can't go to a gala. I'm here to watch your mother. Marco will watch my mother for 3 hours." "She sleeps early," Lorenzo said dismissively. "I need a translator. The CEO of the company I am buying is difficult. He speaks English, but his wife is Italian, and she is the one who truly makes the decisions. I need you to charm her just as you charmed my mother. I am a waitress, Lorenzo, not a corporate spy." Lorenzo stood up and walked over to her. He invaded her personal space again, that overwhelming presence making her heart race. "You are what I say you are," he said softly, "and tonight you are my partner. Do not disappoint me, Clara." The doors opened, and a team of 3 women swarmed in with racks of dresses. "Fix her," Lorenzo told the lead stylist. "Make her look like she owns the room." For the next 4 hours, Clara was poked, prodded, scrubbed, and painted. They styled her hair into soft, cascading waves. They applied makeup that highlighted her high cheekbones and made her green eyes pop. And then the dress. It was a deep, emerald green silk gown, strapless with a slit that went up to her mid-thigh. It hugged every curve of her body before flowing out into a dramatic train. It was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever touched. When she stepped out of the dressing room, the room went silent. Lorenzo was waiting in the foyer, checking his watch, a Patek Philippe, that probably cost more than the car she drove. He looked up. He froze. His hand paused halfway to his cufflink. his eyes widened, sweeping over her from head to toe. For a moment, the cold, calculating billionaire vanished, replaced by a man struck dumb by beauty. "Well," Clara Ara asked self-consciously, "is it too much?" Lorenzo cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. He walked over to her, his gaze intense. "It is." He paused, his voice dropping an octave. Dangerous. He offered her his arm. "Shall we go, Clara? The wolves are waiting." Clara took his arm. The Clear's throat muscle beneath the suit jacket was hard as steel. She felt a thrill of fear and excitement. She was entering a world of sharks armed only with a green dress and her grandmother's dialect. But she didn't know that the biggest shark of all was the woman waiting for them at the gala. Bianca Rossi Lorenzo's ex-fiancée, and she was not going to be happy to see a waitress on his arm. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel was a shark tank disguised as a palace. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a golden glow over the assembly of Seattle's elite. It was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns, a cacophony of clinking champagne flutes and polite, hollow laughter. When Clara Evans stepped through the archway on the arm of Lorenzo Moretti, the room didn't just go quiet. It seemed to inhale. The emerald green silk of her dress flowed over her body like liquid gem, the slit in the skirt offering tantalizing glimpses of her leg with every step. Beside her, Lorenzo was a pillar of dark, imposing elegance. His hand rested possessively on the small of her back, a gesture that screamed ownership to anyone watching. And everyone was watching. "Breathe!" Lorenzo murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her neck. "They smell fear. Do not give them the satisfaction." Clara tightened her grip on his bicep. "I feel like an imposter, Lorenzo. Yesterday I was serving these people breadsticks. Today I'm wearing a dress that costs more than my college tuition. Yesterday is gone," Lorenzo said, his voice hard. "Tonight you are not a waitress. You are the only woman in this room who matters." They moved into the crowd. Clara expected sneers, but she was met with curiosity. Lorenzo introduced her simply as Clara, offering no last name, no title, which only fueled the mystery. They navigated toward the center of the room, where a short, stout man with a red face was arguing with a tall, elegant woman with silver hair. "Robert Sterling." Lorenzo whispered, "CIO of Sterling AI and his wife, Alessandra. She is the real power. She hates fake people. Be yourself, Lorenzo." Robert Sterling boomed, turning around. "I heard the rumors you were in town. And who is this vision?" "This is Clara," Lorenzo said smoothly. "Clara, this is Robert and Alessandra Sterling." Alessandra looked Clara up and down with critical, icy blue eyes. She didn't smile. A pleasure, she said, her accent thick and unmistakably Roman. "Lorenzo usually brings models who do not speak. I hope you are not just decoration." It was a test, a blatant, rude test. Clara felt a spark of indignation. She looked Alessandra in the eye. Signora Sterling Clara began switching effortless to a polished Roman Italian, different from the Sicilian dialect she used with Paola. "Decoration is for Christmas trees. I am here to ensure Lorenzo behaves himself, a full-time job, as I am sure you understand, with a husband as spirited as yours." Alessandra's eyes widened. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. She laughed, a rich, throaty sound. "Brava." Alessandra clapped her hands. "She has fire, Lorenzo. You finally found one with a spine." For the next hour, Clara was the bridge. She translated the nuances of the deal that English couldn't capture. She softened Lorenzo's aggressive negotiation tactics with charm, and she translated Alessandra's sharp concerns into diplomatic suggestions. By the time the waiters circulated with hors the deal was all but signed. Lorenzo had acquired Sterling AI, and he had done it largely because Alessandre Sterling had fallen in love with Clara Ara. "You were magnificent," Lorenzo whispered to her as they stepped away from the group to grab a glass of champagne. His eyes were shining with triumph. "And something else, something hotter. I have never seen anyone handle Alessandre like that." "She just wanted to be heard," Clara Ara said, feeling a flush of pride. She felt like the men were ignoring her. "I am not ignoring you," Lorenzo said, stepping closer. He reached out his fingers, grazing her cheek. The noise of the party faded into the background. "Clara Ara, I well. The voice was like shattered glass, dipped in honey. Lorenzo stiffened. His expression shifted from warmth to a mask of cold fury instantly. He turned around. Standing there was a woman who was the physical embodiment of perfection. Tall blonde, dressed in a crimson gown that looked like it was painted on her skin. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. "Bianca," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to absolute zero. "Hello, darling." Bianca Rossi purred. She stepped forward, ignoring Clara Ara entirely. "I heard you were in Seattle. I didn't realize you were reduced to charity work." She finally turned her gaze to Clara Ara. It was a look of pure, unadulterated malice. "And you must be the help," Bianca said, swirling her wine. "I recognize you. The Gilded Lily, right? You dropped a fork on my shoe last month. I tried to have you fired then." Clara Ara felt the blood drain from her face. This was the ex-fiancée, the daughter of the Italian shipping magnate, the woman who belonged in this world. "Clara Ara is my guest," Lorenzo snarled, stepping between them. "And she is more of a lady in her work uniform than you are in couture." Bianca laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. Oh, Lorenzo, always the savior. "Does she know? Does she know that you're only here because you need the Sterling deal to save your stock price? Does she know she's just a prop to charm the old lady?" She turned to Clara Ara, her eyes gleaming. "He doesn't care about you, sweetie. You're a flavor, a novelty, a peasant girl who speaks the language. Once he gets what he wants, you'll be back scrubbing tables." "Actually," Bianca paused, reaching into her clutch and pulling out a phone. "I made a call. I know about your little financial situation. Mr. Henderson, your landlord, he says you're evicted as of this morning. You're homeless. You're not Cinderella. You're a beggar in a borrowed dress." The words hit Clara Ara like physical blows. Homeless, evicted. Everyone in their circle stopped talking. Heads turned. The shame was a hot physical weight in her stomach. "Is that true?" A woman nearby whispered. "Is she really a homeless waitress?" Clara Ara's eyes filled with tears. She took a step back. "Clara Ara," Lorenzo said, reaching for her. "Don't listen to her." "Oops," Bianca said. She tilted her glass. Red wine splashed across the front of Clara Ara's emerald gown. A dark, ugly stain, spreading like a wound over her heart. "Clumsy me," Bianca smirked. "But don't worry, it matches your status now. Ruined." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Lorenzo looked at the stain on Clara Ara's dress. Then he looked at Bianca. The violence in his eyes was terrifying. He took the glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "You are right, Bianca," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Accidents happen." He poured the entire glass of sticky golden champagne over Bianca's head. The crowd gasped. Bianca shrieked, the liquid ruining her perfect hair, dripping down her crimson dress, ruining her makeup. "Get out of my sight!" Lorenzo roared, his voice shaking the walls. "If you ever speak to her again, I will bankrupt your father's company by noon tomorrow." "Do you understand?" Bianca stood there, dripping, humiliated mouth agape. Lorenzo didn't wait. He whipped off his tuxedo jacket and wrapped it around Clara's shoulders, covering the stain. He scooped her up into his arms bridal style, ignoring her protests. "We are leaving," he announced to the room. Now he carried her out of the ballroom, past the stunned guests, past the paparazzi, and into the night. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. Clara sat in the corner of the limousine, wrapped in Lorenzo's jacket, shivering despite the heat. Lorenzo sat opposite her, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. He was typing furiously on his phone. When they arrived at the Four Seasons, he didn't let her walk. He ushered her into the private elevator and up to the suite. "Go to the shower," he commanded gently as they entered the living room. "Wash it off. I have ordered warm milk and honey for you. It is what my mother used to give me when I was hurt." "I'm not hurt, Clara," whispered her voice, cracking. "I'm humiliated." She was right, Lorenzo. "I am homeless. I am a nobody." Lorenzo stopped. He walked over to her, gripping her shoulders. "You are Clara Evans. You are the woman who saved my mother when I could not. You are the woman who charmed Alessandra Sterling when I could not. Status is a game for fools like Bianca. You have dignity that is worth more." He kissed her forehead, a chaste, lingering kiss that burned against her skin. "Go shower. I will handle everything." Clara nodded and retreated to her suite. She stood under the hot water for a long time, scrubbing the scent of Bianca's perfume and the sticky wine from her skin, when she finally emerged, wrapped in a plush white robe. She felt drained. She walked into the living room. It was empty. The lights were dimmed. A fire was crackling in the modern fireplace. On the coffee table there was a document. Clara frowned. She knew she shouldn't look, but the file was open. It was labeled Evans Clara Background and Asset Allocation. Curiosity 1. She picked it up. It was a dossier on her. It listed her debts, her grandmother's medical bills, her eviction notice, and then a contract draft. Subject is to be retained for the duration of the Seattle negotiation approximities. Companionship for Signora Moretti. Bonus clause. If Sterling acquisition is successful, subject receives a severance package of $50,000 and immediate termination of employment. The words blurred before her eyes. Immediate termination. Bianca's voice echoed in her head. Once he gets what he wants, you'll be back scrubbing tables. He had bought the company tonight. The deal was done, which meant she was done. "You found it." Clara spun around. Lorenzo was standing in the doorway. He had changed into fresh clothes, a white linen shirt and grey trousers. He held 2 mugs of steaming milk. "Is this what I am?" Clara asked, holding up the paper. Her hand was shaking. A line item, a tactic to get a deal signed. Lorenzo set the mugs down. He looked tired. "Clara, that is a standard draft from my legal team. They draw up contracts for everyone I interact with. It means nothing. It says immediate termination upon success of the deal. You got the deal tonight, Lorenzo. Am I fired?" "No," Lorenzo said, walking toward her. "You are not fired. Then what am I? Because I can't do this. I can't play dress-up and have my heart broken by billionaires who think they can buy people." "I am not trying to buy you," Lorenzo snapped. The control he always maintained finally snapped. "I am trying to keep you. Do you think I care about the contract? I care that you are the first person in 5 years who makes me feel like a human being and not a bank account." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He grabbed her face in his hands. "I don't want to terminate the contract," he whispered fiercely. "I want to burn it. I want you to stay. Not for my mother, for me." Clara looked into his eyes. They were dark, stormy, and full of raw need. "Lorenzo," she breathed, He crashed his lips onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was filled with the frustration of the evening, the fear of losing her, and a passion that had been simmering since the moment she spoke Italian in the restaurant. Clara Ara gasped, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. He lifted her up, setting her on the edge of the marble table. The file, the contract, slid off the table and scattered onto the floor, forgotten. For the first time in her life, Clara Ara didn't feel invisible. She felt like the center of the universe. Sunlight streamed through the floor to ceiling windows, blindingly bright. Clara Ara woke up alone in the massive, king-sized bed in the master suite. She stretched a smile, touching her lips, as memories of the night before flooded back. The way Lorenzo had held her, the way he had whispered her name in the dark. It felt like a fairy tale. "Lorenzo," she called out softly. Silence. She sat up. The room was empty. On the bedside table there was a note. Clara Ara, emergency. Meeting with the board regarding the merger. I had to leave early. Marco is outside the door if you need anything. I will see you at dinner. We have much to discuss. It was cold, impersonal. But he was a busy man, she reasoned. She got up and dressed in her own clothes. She wanted to see Signora Paola. She walked out into the living room. The TV was on, tuned to the financial news. Breaking news. Moretti Global acquires Sterling AI. Sources say the deal was finalized late last night. Insider reports suggest Lorenzo Moretti is already planning his return to Milan to oversee the integration. Return to Milan. Clara Ara froze. He hadn't mentioned leaving. Just then, the elevator pinged. It wasn't Lorenzo. It was a woman in a sharp grey suit holding a briefcase. "Miss Evans?" the woman asked briskly. "I am Helena, Mr. Moretti's executive assistant from the New York office. I was flown in this morning." "Oh, hello," Clara Ara said. "I'm here to process the final paperwork," Helena said, opening her briefcase on the table, right where Lorenzo had kissed Clara Ara the night before. She pulled out a check. "Mr. Moretti asked me to give you this. It covers your stipend, the bonus for the Sterling deal, and an additional amount for inconvenience." Clara Ara stared at the check. It was for $100,000. Inconvenience. Clara Ara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, since the Moretts are returning to Italy tomorrow, your services as a companion are no longer required. Signora Paola will be traveling with a medical team." Helena offered a polite, plastic smile. "Mr. Moretti has also arranged for a car to take you to any location in Seattle you wish. He wishes you the best of luck." The world tilted on its axis. He was leaving tomorrow, and he sent his assistant to pay her off the night before. The passion, the words, "I want you to stay." It was all a lie. It was just the adrenaline of the deal. Or worse, it was a goodbye gift. A rich man scratching an itch before going back to his real life. Bianca was right. She was just a flavor. Clara Ara felt a pain in her chest so sharp she thought she might be having a heart attack. She looked at the check. It was enough money to solve all her problems. She could pay her rent for 5 years. She could finish her degree. But it felt like blood money. "I don't want it." Clara Ara said, "Excuse me." Helena blinked. "I said I don't want it." Clara Ara grabbed the check and ripped it in half. Then she ripped it again and again until it was confetti. She threw the pieces on the table. "Tell Mr. Moretti that my dignity is not for sale. Tell him," her voice broke, "tell him he's exactly who everyone says he is." Clara Ara turned and ran. She grabbed her suitcase from the guest room, ignoring Marco's confused protests at the door. She took the service elevator down. She ran out of the hotel and into the rainy Seattle streets, disappearing into the grey city that had always been her prison and was now her tomb. Clears throat. 6 hours later, Lorenzo Moretti stormed into the penthouse like a hurricane. He had spent 6 hours in a windowless boardroom fighting off a hostile counterbid. His phone turned off. All he could think about was getting back to Clara. He was going to ask her to come to Italy. He was going to propose. "Clara," he called out, loosening his tie. "I am home." Silence. "Clara." He walked into the living room. He saw Helena sitting there, looking pale. "Where is she?" Lorenzo asked, looking around. "Is she with my mother?" Sir Helena stood up, trembling. "She left." "Left? What do you mean she left? Did she go to the store?" She quit, sir." "She refused the severance check. She tore it up." Helena pointed to the pile of paper scraps on the table. "She said to tell you that her dignity is not for sale, and that you are exactly who everyone says you are." Lorenzo stared at the torn paper. His blood ran cold. "Severance check. What severance check? The standard protocol check, sir. The one generated automatically by the system when a contract ends. I thought since you were returning to Italy." "You fool!" Lorenzo roared. The sound was so loud, Helena dropped her briefcase. "I did not authorize a severance check. I authorized a marriage settlement draft. I told legal to prepare a proposal, not a termination." He grabbed his hair, pacing wildly. "She thinks I fired her. She thinks I paid her for—" He couldn't even say it. The night they shared. She thought he paid her for sex. "Where did she go?" he demanded. "I don't know, sir. She just ran." Lorenzo spun around and sprinted to his mother's room. Signora Paola was sitting by the window, looking at a photo album. Tears clear his throat, streaming down her face. "Lorenzo?" She sobbed. Why did the sun go away? Why did Clara leave? "She kissed me goodbye. She said she was not good enough for us." "She is too good for us, Mama," Lorenzo said, his voice choking. "And I was too stupid to see it." He grabbed his phone. "Marco, track her phone now." "I can't, sir." Marco's voice crackled over the radio. She left her company phone in the lobby, but the doorman said she took a taxi to the Greyhound bus station. She asked about tickets to Portland. "Get the car," Lorenzo ordered. "Move the bus station." The Greyhound station was a stark contrast to the Four Seasons. It smelled of diesel-stale coffee and hopelessness. Clara sat on a plastic bench clutching her ticket. She had $300 to her name. She was going to Portland. It was cheaper there. She could start over when no one knew her. "Boarding for Portland Gate 4, the loudspeaker announced. Clara stood up. She wiped her eyes. "Don't cry," she told herself. "You survived eviction. You survived poverty. You will survive a broken heart." She handed her ticket to the driver. She stepped onto the bus steps. Screeching tires echoed through the station. A black Rolls-Royce swerved into the bus loading bay, ignoring the honks and shouts of angry drivers. It slammed to a halt, blocking the bus's path. The door flew open. Lorenzo Moretti jumped out. He looked maniacal. His hair was wild, his shirt unbuttoned, his tie gone. He ran toward the bus. "Clara!" he screamed. The bus driver stood up. "Hey, buddy, you can't park there!" Lorenzo ignored him. He pounded on the glass door of the bus. Clara opened the door. Clara froze in the aisle. Her heart stopped. She looked out the window. He was there. The driver opened the door. "Sir, I'm calling the police." Lorenzo bounded up the steps. He saw her standing in the aisle, looking small and broken. "Get off the bus." He breathed, his chest heaving. "Go away," Clara said, tears spilling over. "I don't want your money. I don't want your pity. Go back to your models and your mergers." "I don't want the models," Lorenzo shouted, startling the other passengers. "And I don't care about the merger. I care about you." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It wasn't a check. It was a handwritten note in Italian. "Helena gave you the wrong paper." Lorenzo said, his voice breaking. She gave you the termination from the legal department. I didn't write that. He stepped closer, ignoring the people filming with their phones. I wrote this, he whispered. He handed it to her. Clara Ara took it. Her hands shook. It was a list. 1 things that make Paula smile. Lavender old songs and Clara Ara. 2 things that make the business work. Integrity vision and Clara Ara. 3 things that make Lorenzo breathe. Clara Ara. I didn't authorize a severance package, Lorenzo said, dropping to one knee right there in the dirty aisle of the Greyhound bus. I authorized a life partnership. I was going to ask you to come to Italy, not as an employee, as my wife. Clara Ara gasped. The whole bus went silent. I love you, Clara Ara, Lorenzo said, tears in his dark eyes. I have loved you since you yelled at me about the pillow. You are the only real thing in my life. Please don't go to Portland. Come home with me. Clara Ara looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of a man who finally found his treasure and almost lost it. You really love me, she whispered. More than my own life, he swore. Ti amo, Animia. Clara Ara dropped her bag. She threw her arms around his neck. Lorenzo caught her burying his face in her neck, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. The passengers on the bus erupted into applause. The bus driver wiped a tear from his eye. I love you too, Clara Ara sobbed. You idiot. Lorenzo laughed, a sound of pure relief. He stood up, lifting her with him. He carried her off the bus, past the cheering crowd, and back to the Rolls-Royce. 1 year later, the terrace of the Moretti Villa in Sicily was bathed in golden sunset light. Signora Paola sat in her rocking chair, singing a lullaby to a sleeping baby, wrapped in a blanket embroidered with lavender. Lorenzo walked out onto the terrace, holding 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to Clara Ara, who was leaning against the stone railing, looking out over the olive groves. She wore a simple white dress, and on her finger a massive emerald ring glittered the same color as the dress she wore the night her life changed. Happy anniversary, Signora Moretti, Lorenzo whispered, kissing her neck. Happy anniversary, Lorenzo. She smiled, leaning back into him. They watched the sun dip below the hills of Corleo. They were far from the rain of Seattle, far from the cruel whispers of the gala. They were home, and for the billionaire and the waitress, it was the richest feeling in the world. If Clara Ara and Lorenzo's journey touched your heart, please give this video a huge thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to share this with a friend who believes in true love, and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another dramatic romantic story. What would you have done if you were Clara Ara at the bus station? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.